Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. That's 37 letters, and I know because I counted each letter one by one until I lost count. And I started over and lost count again and again and again, and before I knew it, 10 minutes had passed, and I forgot I was supposed to be working on my speech outline. You see, I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or as it is more simply known, ADHD. So I understand not all of you are familiar with ADHD. It's a term that's thrown around a lot and used to describe a lot of different things, such as hyper children or lazy teens. Today, my goal is actually to inform you what ADHD is, its increasing prevalence in adults, and some of the treatment options for it. Um, so first, let's go over what ADHD is and how it affects the brain. Firstly, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, ADHD is characterized by symptoms that fall into one of two groups. The first group is inattention, and this includes symptoms such as distractibility, the inability to plan and focus on tasks, and forgetfulness, such as losing important belongings. And then the second group is hyperactivity symptoms. This includes things like the inability to sit still, bouncing off the walls, excessive talking, and not waiting turns. So these symptoms usually begin before the age of 12, and um, they impact and cause difficulty in multiple areas of life, such as work, school, sports, um, at home. And according to a 2017 study done by Martine Hugman, she led the largest study to look at ADHD brains. They called it Enigma ADHD. They actually found that there were parts of ADHD brains that were smaller than normal. And these smaller parts are actually responsible for something called executive functioning. So, what is executive functioning? Well, that's the ability for healthy people to effectively plan, focus on, and complete tasks without much mental effort. However, they found that the development of these skills in ADHD brains was delayed by about 3 to 4 years, which is pretty significant. Um, so, that research actually is mostly focused on children, though, and a lot of ADHD research is. However, that doesn't mean that ADHD doesn't go into adulthood. In fact, there was a study led by William J. Barbaresi. He's a professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. They actually took 232 people who were diagnosed with ADHD as kids, and then they followed up with them at age 27. And what they found was actually pretty surprising. About one-third of those people still had ADHD as adults. But now that we know what ADHD is and that it could persist into adulthood, we can now talk about how it affects the lives of adults with ADHD. First up, Russell Barkley. He's a doctor a professor of psychiatry at Virginia Commonwealth University. He notes in a 2020 article in Attitude magazine that ADHD in adults, it looks a lot different from ADHD in kids. Firstly, the hyperactive symptoms, the bouncing off the walls and stuff, those things don't really show in adults. You don't see adults with ADHD getting up out of their seat and running around the room. But the other group of symptoms, the inattentive symptoms, the distractibility, forgetfulness, these things actually are a little bit more pronounced in adulthood, especially in environments like college and the workplace. And drawing from my own personal experience with ADHD, I could definitely say those things make adult life a lot harder. In fact, I mentioned in my intro speech that I struggled in school for most of my life, and this was actually because of ADHD. I really didn't know that, though, until a couple of years into college. Actually, later last year, I was diagnosed, and it explained a lot. But, my experience is one shared by many adults. In fact, there was a study led by Ronald C. Kessler. He led a study in 2006. They were basically studying ADHD in adults, and what they found out was that there were 4.4% of American adults with ADHD, and that's actually a lot of people. That's 14 million people. Um, so those people they actually found were more likely to develop additional disorders such as anxiety, depression, and substance abuse, which are very serious. But what are they to do? How are these 14 million people going to manage their ADHD symptoms and live happier lives? Well, thankfully, there are treatment options available. Firstly, medication has proven to be the single most effective option in treating ADHD. But additionally, there's talk therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, which also help with ADHD. They help build healthy habits in particular. What works out best for me is a combination of these two treatment options, plus, just healthy habit building in general. One thing that helped me a lot with my ADHD was actually this calendar right here. I pretty much write everything on it. Even if it's small and insignificant, I write it down just because it's very easy for me to forget these things. You call it a multimodal approach. But to conclude things, ADHD is a very expansive topic, and what I just went over, it's just the tip of the iceberg. But I hope with this information you all understand what ADHD is and how it could affect the brain and affect adults. And I also hope that you're a little bit more inspired to look into it yourselves, do some additional research, and learn a little bit more about it, deepen your understanding. Especially if you or someone else has the disorder, that information could be very helpful. So definitely do that. But thank you for listening to my speech. You all have a really good day. Bye.